Hello, everyone. I'm live just outside the Mapei Stadium. As you can see, there are still a few Napoli fans waiting for the team bus going away, coming back to Naples after a brilliant win, I have to say, from Napoli 2-0 against Sassuolo. I'm joined by Giancarlo Rinaldi. It's the first game of the season in Serie A. Ciao, Giancarlo. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, a good return for Serie A as well. Nice to see as a Scottish Italian. Nice to see Scott McTominay continuing as he did last season with a goal and a pretty comfortable win. I thought for Napoli, a kind of statement of intent, really, that they're going to be serious contenders to retain their title this season. I thought it was fairly comfortable.
Look, I've got another guest with us, and he's Matt Santangelo, because I think the first half of the Milan game is just finished. No, he's actually going to join us later on. So let's keep on talking about Napoli a little bit, and then we'll be joined by Matt as well. Gian, talking about Napoli, the early steps were good but not excellent, I would say, until the McTominay goal, which was still pretty early, around minute 17. It wasn't too surprising, perhaps, to see Scott McTominay playing as a left winger. But what did you make of his performance in that, let's say, strange position? But it's not that strange for those who follow Serie A, because he's been covering that position for a few months now, even at the end of the last campaign.
Yeah, no, he's slotted in really well. I thought. It's just he's become he already was a versatile player. He's become an even more versatile player playing in Italy, and he's just got the timing of his runs into the penalty box have just become amazing. It was a lovely, for people that haven't seen it, you should see it, because lovely cross from Politano, and he met it perfectly. Like if a striker, if Lukaku had scored that goal, you would say, "Wow, what a header!" It's easy to forget that he's a midfielder, but it's become so easy for him to score goals, and he almost it shows that he can work in a team with Kevin De Bruyne. There's obviously issues there to be fine-tuned, I think, in terms of how they fit in a team together. But against, obviously, lesser opposition, a newly promoted side, it looked like that could work pretty well for them. I thought De Bruyne had highs and lows in the game. I think it'd be fair to say he almost scored the goal within 90 seconds, but he also almost gave away a goal. So, a bit of adjustment there, I think, which is only natural to a different league.
He said something very interesting, De Bruyne, at the end of the game in his interview with DAZN. He said, "It's myself who have to adjust to Napoli, not the other way around, because they won the title last season. They play a way of football that is different, practically, from the way I was accustomed to. So I have to adjust to Napoli, and it's not the other way around." And you could tell that, because I think he touched the ball in so many positions, De Bruyne, today. He was a sort of deep line playmaker. Sometimes he was replacing Lobotka, getting the ball in between the two central defenders to start the build-up. He was a pure central midfielder. He was a kind of attacking midfielder. It was a complete performance, I would say, or at least he touched the ball in every part of the pitch. One of the first few passes wasn't that good, because he nearly set up Sassuolo for a clear chance, but then the rest of the performance, he was always in control, I think, and it was a pretty good debut, regardless of his free kick goal, which was also very good. He said, "I've tried to put the ball in a tricky position, in a dangerous position. Nobody touched it this time. Usually somebody touches it, but this time he went in without the need to touch it." I mentioned we're going to come back on the Napoli thing in a minute. Let's discuss briefly the first half of the Milan game with Matt Santangelo. Matt, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
It's a pleasure. Thanks to be on with you guys.
So how about the first half of the Milan game? I haven't, honestly, I don't even know the result because I've been here at Saudi Stadium. So I saw it was 0-0. I saw there was an injury to Ciro Immobile. Was the result, and what are your thoughts on the opening 45 minutes?
Of the Milan game? I'm sorry, the Milan game?
Yeah, Milan game. Immobile, it's Bologna game. It's in Rome.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you're referencing that game. Yeah, it's been an interesting start for Milan. I think, this is a match that, you'd assume at home Milan should be able to handle the opposition, right? But I think the way that this started, all credit to Cremonese, because obviously they're still seeing there's cracks within this team, and there's clearly a lot of things that Milan need to work out. And, Basket Rocco gets a goal, header, pretty bad defending. I thought Pavlovic should have did much better on that. And in possession, Milan have looked pretty strong, and I think that was expected, right? But they're really unable to break down Cremonese. I think they're kind of understanding of the fact that, let them have the ball. We'll try to pick our spots on the counter. They've had a couple other dangerous chances as well. Milan were able to get a equalizer moments ago before I jumped down with you guys through Pavlovic, a header. Looked as though it was going to be potentially called off. There was a collision in the build-up. Salamaker's feeds to Estupinian, who hasn't had the best first half either. So two of the players that really haven't done much for Milan as far as the first half goes, connect on the goal, and Milan are back at level terms. And I think what we saw in this first half from Milan, I think is something that Milan fans have to get comfortable with, because I think we all know that Allegri football, Allegri results in previous tenures, they don't always look great. But I think at the end of the day, Milan need to focus on getting wins, and if they can do that by getting something in the second half, you'll take that.
How about the Modric performance? Because the big talking point today is the old stars, but still the very good stars having their Serie A debut. De Bruyne scored a goal for Napoli against Sassuolo. How about Modric at San Siro tonight?
Modric has looked fine. I think, I think he's probably the least of the concerns, right? I know he's creeping up on 40, but it's a very smart, intelligent player. I think in this midfield bank of five with those two wing backs, and you have two runners like a Loftus-Cheek and a Fofana, I think it really allows Modric to do what he does best, survey the field, pick his spots, and he actually did that on the Santi Jimenez goal that got ruled off. But, really good eye for the pass, that final ball that Milan are sorely lacking at many times. So I think that he's been totally fine. I think that in the second half, this game is calling for Arden Yashari. I know he was a big acquisition in addition to Modric and some of the Ricci. But I think right now, the way this team is sort of framed and shaped, I think they're really lacking someone that could connect all that possession that they're building in the midfield to that attack. You're oftentimes seeing Pulisic really have to drift and drop deep just to get the ball. And I think that's obviously going to isolate a guy like Santi Jimenez, where, he wants to be in the box. He wants to be able to get that one or two chances per game, make the most of that. And I think that's where Milan are really lacking right now. So let's see what sort of substitutes Allegri brings on.
So I just said perhaps Jashari is going to be that man who connects a little bit better the midfield and the attack, because clearly, as you said, right now there's a little bit of a gap between the attack and the midfield, so the Milan attacks don't look that good, at least.
I mean, I think, look, you can bring on a guy like Ricci, and I think he plays those sort of short intermediate passes really well. When you get the ball deep and you're able to defend, you can recycle that ball to him, and he'll make a good decision with it, and obviously get into the feet of those who can make those more progressive long passes vertically. But I think, again, we know that Yashari was a big talking point this summer. He's someone who can sit deep as more of that holding midfielder. I still think there's a lot of qualities within his game that you can have a guy like Modric play with him, and you could have a Yashari be a guy that with his engine, with his ability to carry, because he is a pretty good defensive player, but also very stocky and sturdy on the ball, that you can carry forward and he can make those sort of final passes as well. I think we saw that quite a bit with him at Club Brugge last year and in the Champions Leagues on many occasions. So I think that's what we would probably see, because I don't think that Fofana and Loftus-Cheek have done really anything in the first half that warrants them getting more minutes. Although, again, maybe Allegri has a little bit more of rope and leash, and he says, let me give him 15, 10 minutes, see what they can do. And then you bring on Yashari, who, again, entered this team very late. So I think we have to kind of see how he's going to utilize his bench in the second half.
Dank, your take on Milan, not necessarily on this game, but generally the transfer market, how they're moving, where they can get Allegri. We had, as Football Italia writers, a prediction on the Serie A table for this season, and I think you are the only one who put Milan out of the top four. Why?
I think there's still some structural problems there that I'm not convinced that they've sorted. So that was my reservation on that, really. I mean, and also I'm not a big fan of, you'll know the Italian term, minestra riscaldata. I'm not really that big a fan of people going back to clubs, although, you know, my own team, Fiorentina, are doing exactly the same. And there's no doubt Allegri has got, you know, winning football in his veins. I was actually going to ask Matt, has he still got his jacket on? Because that's obviously a big indicator of how serious he's taking a game. You know, has he thrown his jacket away yet? Or is that for the second half?
I think that might be for the second half. Obviously, you know, some of the calls in the first half, I thought the officiating side of things, which I know is always a huge talking point in this sport, I think the first half has been pretty fair. There hasn't been any sort of, you know, crazy calls one way or the other, or very controversial decisions. It's been a pretty clean game in that sense. So, yeah, we know Allegri is good for, you know, when the blazer comes off and you see him on the touchline, very animated, you know, that's obviously textbook Allegri. But again, if it comes off and it results in a win for Milan, I don't think you can complain at this point, right? I think that Milan fans, and I jokingly tweeted this, but, you know, people are so seeking clean sheets and a more polished defensive approach. I don't see BBC back there. I don't see the heights of a Juventus back there, you know, guarding this team. So I think Milan, again, at this point, just need to get comfortable with getting wins, you know, especially when you start to kind of look at the schedule in the first batch of games, which I think is very important because Milan need to get off to a good start. That was such a huge issue for them last year. Compile wins, get to the positions where you're playing Napoli match day 5. And, you know, look, maybe you have some momentum going to that game. You have your sort of structure, to your point, intact, and you know who are thriving, where you can put certain players. And then you see how you approach the big games. But Milan struggled badly in those small games, so they need to figure it out in the second half.
Matt, I'll let you go back, enjoy the Milan game, hopefully for you as a Milan fan. And whenever you want, just come back. With the season has just started, so there'll be a lot to talk about Milan. Of course, they don't play European competitions, but you know, we're talking about Napoli as well here. And last season for Napoli was a big advantage for them not to play European competition. So I still think, I mean, Milan fans have a lot to be optimistic about. But yeah, probably the first half, most of them expected something more from the Rossoneri. So let us know what happens. And thank you very much for joining us. We speak very, very soon. Thank you, Matt.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Bye. So, Jank, going back to Napoli, back to McTominay, going back to Kevin De Bruyne, who's both scored on their debut in Serie A in 2025-26. I think what was interesting about Napoli, and talking about Scott McTominay again, is that Conte used this sort of unbalanced attack, let's say, where they mostly attacked and mostly tried to create from the right flank to put crosses in and try to fill the box with as many players as possible, especially, you know, Anguissa moving anywhere he could inside the box, Lorenzo Luca going to the near post, and Scott McTominay attacking the space from the far post. And is in this sort of situation he scored the first goal. We didn't see many times Scott McTominay play as you would expect from a winger, like trying to go for the crosses or try to go one man on man. It's a position where he has to help the midfield when they don't have the ball, and he needs to attack the space and create numerical advantage inside the box when they put crosses in, and they mostly put crosses in through either Giovanni Di Lorenzo or Matteo Politano. It's complicated and simple at the same time, I would say.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's interesting because it does, you know, in a way, it should make the opposition's job easier because you know that they're only really attacking you down one side. They've got, but it's such a strong side, I think, that with Politano and Di Lorenzo, that you know the delivery is going to be good. And all you're doing really with Oliveira and McTominay is kind of blocking up that left side and then waiting for your opportunity. I wanted to give a mention I thought Josh Doig, another Scottish player, had quite a good game, although he was on the difficult side. But I thought, British supporters will remember him from his time at Hibs, and he's been around to Verona, and now he's at Sassuolo. And he actually had a pretty good game, a solid game at left back, got forward, had a shot as well, put in a good shift. But Napoli did focus on that wing, and obviously, a goal came from that wing as well. I'm not sure I think Lorenzo Luca needs time to, nobody really expected him to be thrown in at the deep end, I guess, and leading the line. We all thought it would be a kind of more gradual thing, and I think that'll take some fine-tuning as well, because he's a very different, although he's a big presence physically, he's very different physical presence to Romelu Lukaku, and so that'll take time. But I thought if I was a Napoli fan, I would think the early signs were quite good at getting, you've got a marquee signing in Kevin De Bruyne. It doesn't always work out, with kind of crowbarring a big player into a team, especially an already successful team. But they're going to need a bigger squad this season. What you mentioned about now playing on two fronts with Champions League and Serie A, they're going to need that stronger squad. So they're going to need more players. So they're going to need to find ways to kind of get all their players into the side, I guess, and get the very best out of them. And Conte has shown over the years that, he finds a way of putting together a winning team. There'll be tougher tests than Sassuolo. I thought they were organised. They look, to me anyway, the newly promoted side most likely to stay up this season. But they were, in the end, they didn't do a lot to trouble. Meret did not have too many saves to make over 90 plus minutes.
Yeah, you mentioned Doig, and I agree that he was the best Sassuolo defender tonight. The others struggled a little bit on aerial duels. McTominay scored a great goal, but it just appeared from nowhere inside the box. So it could have been marked a little bit better, I guess, from Sassuolo defenders. And I agree as well on the overall view on Sassuolo. I think they have more quality than the other newly promoted side. For example, you see a player like Berardi didn't have many chances, he didn't create much, but the spirit that I saw from Berardi tonight, it's something that I would like to see as an Italian fan and an Italian journalist from all the Italian players, because it's something that we lacked too many times under Luciano Spalletti, I guess. And Gennaro Gattuso was not too far away from me watching the game today here at the Mapei. So for sure, he's taken note of Berardi, of his temper, of his determination, what he put on the pitch, even if it was a very difficult game for him technically and tactically. But whenever he touched the ball, he always did something really wise, and I think he has to. He really has to be one of those called up. If not now in September, perhaps in October. I think he can just improve. And there are a few talking points regarding the Italy national team, starting with Lorenzo Luca, who you mentioned as well. I think the most difficult part for him came when he had to do the marquee move from Romelu Lukaku, which is playing with the ball with his shoulder to the goal. It's the thing that Lukaku knows to do best, I think, after scoring goals. And I think he has to improve in that aspect, Lorenzo Luca, to suit Antonio Conte's playing style. But there aren't many strikers who can play the way Lukaku plays. Even Rasmus Højlund, who is the first target for Napoli to replace Lukaku, is not that sort of striker. It's something that he has to learn going forward. And this is why I think this Napoli side, it's what I wrote on Italia as well, they look pretty strong already, but they will evolve, because they will be forced to have new qualities and new additions that they didn't have last season. De Bruyne is an example, but the striker is another example, I guess. Until Lukaku doesn't return from injury, they need to adapt and they need to use first Luca and then another signing, whoever is going to be, in another way, because it's not going to be the same for them.
No, definitely not. They need to adjust. They're going to have to adjust to that. And I think you have to play to a player's strengths as well. So you can't ask, you can ask Luca to try to do some of the things that Lukaku does, but you also have to play in a way that helps get the best out of Luca as well. So, that will be interesting to see, because Lukaku is going to be out for quite some time. So, it obviously depends, as you say, if they bring someone else in. But I don't think they'll find someone that's a carbon copy of Romelu. So, they're going to have to adapt their style a bit to get the best out of these players. I mean, we know that Luca loves a cross ball. He's one of the best in the air of all Italian strikers. Certainly, he can hit a great header. So, that sort of service from the wings, in a way, it's a shame to not have, and I guess that can happen over time, that, they can adjust to pose more of a threat down the left side, so that he's getting crosses coming in from both sides. But, I think we know that with a Conte side, the summer, the pre-season training is intensive. They will get better. They will, as the kind of the sort of the cement goes out their legs and they start to get fitter and stronger as well. I think we'll see that they power on as the season goes ahead. But they will need to find ways to get, the personnel have changed. So you can't play, Lukaku's such a focal point to the attack in such a unique way that you're going to have to adapt to find different ways to play. But I think Conte's shown over the years, although he does love Big Rom, but it does show, he has shown that he can adapt to the personnel that he's got, and I'm sure we've already seen some evidence of plans in store to take this Napoli team on a few steps, and the club has invested pretty heavily as well. So I think they believe that they can be competitive on two fronts this year.
Jack, you may find it strange, but there is something you have in common with Christian Vieri, which is you both think Napoli are not winning the title. You think, and Vieri thinks as well, that Inter is going to win the title. Is it because of Lukaku, or that would be regardless of Lukaku?
Yeah, but that regardless, I think that I think the demands of two competitions, although Napoli have strengthened their squad, I don't know. I was a believer last season that Inter should have won the league, but because of a variety of factors, because Napoli had a great run and were in great form, but also the distraction of Champions League and going quite deep in that competition. I thought that was where Inter ultimately fell foul. A change of coach obviously makes a big difference to Inter, but I still see, to me, really it was just looking at the resources available to each manager. To my eyes, still Inter have the strongest squad of players. They are getting older, but that was really the basis for that. I would say, though, to anybody listening, that my predictions are notoriously poor. So I wouldn't set too much still by that. But just as I say, to me, they still have a reserve of talent that is greater than any other Italian team at the moment. And and they've gone deeper in Europe than most Italian in the Champions League than most Italian teams have, which to me suggests that the quality of the squad is just that little bit stronger. And also, it's proved very hard to retain the title in Italy. That's just been very difficult. Unlike in other leagues around Europe, it's just we can talk about the overall quality, but it's a very competitive league. It's wide open, and as I say, just to me, Napoli having to play the two competitions, it will be more difficult for them. Inter's more used to it and been up there all the time. So it was kind of I guess it was a safe prediction, a risk-free prediction. I wasn't too spectacular with my prediction there, because they've always been there or thereabouts, and I suspect that they will be there again. Although, a new manager may mean that they're not as strong as they were. But just looking at the 11 that will take to the pitch week in, week out, and the kind of the choices on the bench as well, I think they're still the strongest kind of 20+ players in Serie A at the moment.
Yeah, what surprised me about, Inter have a different coach, so they got Christian Chivu now. They had Simone Inzaghi last season. As we saw in the preseason, they're still building their identity, because the feeling is that he wants to play a little bit and press a little bit higher up the pitch, keep the ball a little bit more than Inzaghi used to do. But the feeling is that these Inter sides still give their best when they wait for the opponents and try to hurt with counter attacks. But regardless of that, talking about Napoli again today, we saw a few new tactical things from Antonio Conte, and it's not just about McTominay playing wide and, as we already said, cutting inside and try to be a little bit of a winger, a little bit of a central midfielder, a little bit of an attacking midfielder. It was very interesting what Di Lorenzo and Oliveira did, which is not. It's nothing new in European football, because having inverted fullbacks, so the wide defenders cutting inside and creating numerical advantage and helping in the build-up inside the pitch is nothing new. It's something that Pep Guardiola has been doing for many years, for example, like many other coaches. But is not necessarily something that Conte has always done in the past, especially because he liked to play pretty wide with either fullbacks or wingbacks. So we saw a few tactical tweaks, and even the fact that one midfielder was dropping deep, mostly Stan Lobotka, but sometimes Kevin De Bruyne as well. It's the signal of a change, that he's building something different. He's trying to do something different, because, as you said, the personnel has changed, and so he can't expect to stick to the same style and get the same results, because they've got different players now. What impressed me all the time, despite everything, is once again McTominay MVP tonight. True leader on and off the pitch. He got this interview with the Zone at the end of the game, and he spoke with De Bruyne, and it was so humble as well, because he said it's not me who has to give advice to De Bruyne. He's De Bruyne who has to give advice to me, and it's not surprising, because if you were talking to a Premier League fan a couple of years ago and say who is the best player between De Bruyne and McTominay, everyone of course would have said De Bruyne. But right now, I was talking about this with a colleague as well here at the Mapei. What's impressive is that De Bruyne has to prove he is better than McTominay, which is crazy to think.
yeah, Scottish people, that's music to the Scotland fans' ears to hear those two names mentioned together. But his impact, I think we said this last season, I struggle to think of many foreign players who came to Italy and had as big an impact as Scott McTominay did in his first season. It was absolutely outstanding, and I don't think even he, in his most kind of wildest dreams, would have thought that he would have that kind of impact. And in a way, I've said this to some people, that the only way is downhill from now, really, because he had such an incredible first season, absolutely adored in Naples. It's going to be hard, and yet he got off to a flying start there. So he's a known quantity in Serie A terms. Obviously, Kevin De Bruyne's career, across Europe, particularly in England, speaks for itself. It's incredible, and he's been an amazing player. But he's not played in Italy yet, and he obviously wants to test himself there. You and I know it's a very different league to play in the Premier League. To play in Serie A is a different test, and not you can be a great player, but you might not find yourself at home in those surroundings. You know, it asks different questions of a player, and he's further on in his career, and where McTominay really, you almost like think, in a way, he wasted time by being in England. He would have been better to come to Italy sooner. With De Bruyne, it'll be interesting to see, you know, will his skills, I mean, undoubtedly he's got the ability to thrive in Serie A. There's no question of that at all. But it does pose different questions. There are more tactical traps, I think, in the Italian game still. The coaching, the tactics is still at a different level. I mean, McTominay says himself he's learned a lot and become a very different player by playing in Italy. And I think, you know, for De Bruyne, he comes with a great baggage of skill, of quality, of ability. That there's no doubt. The only sort of question really is how will that fit into the Italian game, you know, because it is a different beast and it does take time to adjust. He's got everything. I mean, you would think he's got everything he needs to adjust. But yes, at the moment, you know, Scott McTominay's got a season of great performances behind him in Serie A. That's something that Kevin De Bruyne doesn't have. So it'd be interesting to see. But I think, you know, if anyone can harness the two of them, it probably is Antonio Conte. And if he can, you know, it's going to be a you know, looking across that midfield, really, you know, I think although Lobotka didn't really touch the ball as much tonight as he has in previous games, and that may be an indication of a different approach as well. But, you know, that midfield is very, very strong, and that's the heart of Napoli, I guess, and they will stand or fall by the qualities that midfield produces.
It's impressive how much they've changed in the last 3 years. I mentioned you about Gattuso was here in the stands. There was somebody else in the stands watching the game, and it's Cristiano Giuntoli, ex-Juventus director, ex-Napoli director. He practically built the team that won the title 3 years ago under Spalletti, the first in 33 years, with Kvaratskhelia and Osimhen. Now that era formally came to an end this summer when Osimhen left to Galatasaray on a permanent transfer after last season's loan deal. I mean, they've changed so much. We've seen Juventus dominating for a decade, of course, changing through the decade. But for example, the first 3 years under Conte, they didn't change much. There were a few years under Allegri where they were pretty similar to themselves for a few, I mean, at least for a couple of years consecutive. This time around, they've changed so much. They're very different from 3 years ago. Yet again, this is just the first game of the season. They're very different from last year as well. And it's impressive how quickly and how apparently so far well they're changing. Even De Bruyne signals that it's not necessarily the start of a new era for Napoli, but they made a very strange decision, or a decision that they don't do usually, because you remember De Laurentiis talking even quite badly about, you know, old players that were over 30 that he didn't like signing because of their high salary, because they wouldn't stick around for long and perhaps not being an asset for the club going forward. Tonight, De Bruyne became the oldest outfield player to make his Serie A debut with Napoli in the three-point era, which means going back to the start of the 90s, and really is something new for Napoli, because we were not accustomed to see old players accustomed in Serie A, but not at Napoli. And I think this is pretty interesting, especially for what has to come. So not just Serie A, but also for Champions League football, because I'm sure the next steps that he wants to make, De Laurentiis and the entire Napoli, is to be even more relevant in Europe. Because I know 100% the year that he dominated that season under Spalletti, it does regret going out that way against Milan, a team that they dominated through the season in Serie A, yet they went out in the quarterfinals, because it means that history matters somehow. It has a weight somehow when it comes to playing those sort of matches.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's, you know, that was an opportunity, I think, that might never come again. So you're going to regret that. But going to your original point of how Napoli have reinvented themselves, I don't think we can understate how big a thing it is for Italian football as well to have a new force, if you will. It's always been Juventus, Inter, Milan, Inter, Juventus, back and forward. So to have Napoli consistently at the top of that, Roma have come into the equation from time to time, but to have a team, particularly from the south of Italy, challenging, setting the bar, if you will, for Italian football is very unusual. And it's very unusual for them to have sustained success. You might get one-offs here and there, but to have them coming in and really being a force is testament to the work that's been done by, as you mentioned, Giancarlo, but now going forward, they really have invested cleverly. They've run the club very well and become a model, I suppose, for teams that are not they've always been a big team, Napoli, but they've probably underachieved in the past. Now they're starting to deliver what they can achieve, and I think it's great for Italian football to have the sort of the table opened up a bit, and you can see there are genuinely more contenders and there are more big clubs in there. Some people would say that's a sign of weakness in the traditional giants, and I think that's a point that certainly Juventus fans would make. Inter to a degree, Milan definitely, that these big teams. So it's left an opportunity, but still somebody had to capitalise on that chance, and it's been Napoli to win a couple of titles in a short space of time and look like credible contenders to win the title again. I think that's an amazing era for Italian football, because it has been the preserve of a very small number of teams for a very long time.
One very last thing, talking about the national team again, talking about Gennaro Gattuso, who was here in the stands. Just 1 week before the squad list for the next games, World Cup qualifiers are released, there were a few Italian players on the pitch tonight. Di Lorenzo, Meret, Luca started for Napoli. Sassuolo, they have a few Italian players who are very unlikely to be called up, starting with Turati in goal. I think for Sassuolo, those with the most chances of being called up are those up front, Berardi and Pinamonti. I have to say I didn't really like Pinamonti tonight. He didn't make many touches, but most worryingly, he made the wrong movements. I like him as a striker because it's somebody who's been scoring more than 10 goals for many years in a row in Serie A, but somehow he always misses that bit to be called up to the national team. So based on tonight's performance, Napoli and Sassuolo, who would you call up if you were Gattuso?
I mean, I don't think Pinamonti, not on that performance. You might be tempted by Berardi because he still looks a quality player, but it's been, personally, I would give him more time. He's been out with he's come back from injury. He's just back in Serie A. I think I'd want to see a bit more before I would think of calling him up. I think Meret will get called up. He didn't have a lot to do tonight. Di Lorenzo is a very solid player. I think he'll be in there. And Luca offers something.
Do you think he's going to play with 3-man defense or 4-man defense?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think the options are there to do either. I mean, we've got now Calafiori had a great game for Arsenal this afternoon as well. I think he set up a couple of goals, so there'd certainly be the options there. It would be tempting to play the 3-man because there's enough players there that would be comfortable playing it. But I don't know. It will be very interesting to see, because I think to me Gattuso is more a man about motivation than tactics. I think if it's 3-man or 4-man, he'll be more worried about the heart, really. I think, and who gives the best for their country. And so, going back to what you asked, I think Di Lorenzo has shown that he's a very good servant of Italy down the years. I don't know, Politano, I find a frustrating player in that he seems to deliver more for Napoli, more for his club side than he does for his country. But, you know, it would depend on what other options he thinks he's got at other clubs, and how much he needs a wide man. He would definitely enter the free. But, you know, to be honest, it was probably a better night for the Scotland manager than it was for the Italy manager, with McTominay and Doig looking so good. So probably Steve Clarke will be happier than Rino Gattuso after watching that game.
100%, and even Billy Gilmour got some minutes in the final stages, replacing Stan Lobotka. So yeah, surely you're right. Much better news for Scotland fans and the Scotland coach than for Italy. But the Serie A season has started, and there will be plenty to talk about. And again, it was marked by best Scottish player right now, who is Scott McTominay, and is also the best Serie A player because he won the VP last season and the Man of the Match award tonight. So he started right from where he finished. Scott McTominay and Napoli as well. They got a 2-0 win, which I cover from here, the Mapei Stadium. Giancarlo, was a massive pleasure, as always, to discuss football and culture with you, and hopefully very, very soon we'll do that again. Tomorrow I'll be in Turin for Juventus Parma, another big game from Serie A round one, which finishes not tomorrow night, but on Monday with Inter Torino. Gian, grazie mille, grazie.
Di niente, ciao.
Thank you very much. Bye.